now without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome today's first speaker, Anita Colby, Senior Director with Ipsos UU. Anita, you have the floor.
Thanks so much, Ellen, and welcome everyone to today's webinar on storytelling. So the impetus for today's webinar on storytelling is that there's a shift going on in our industry. Consumer insight roles are changing, and storytelling can support teams in these shifts. So the first is that insight roles are no longer focused on research and insight alone, but rather about influencing business decisions and driving brand success. The second is that it's more important than ever to keep the consumer at the heart of decision making. And the third is that anyone can collect data. It's a commodity at this point, so we're moving from data acquisition to humanizing and curating the data. So we need to move the needle on injecting human elements into the data to help stakeholders care and connect emotionally to drive decision making, and to curate the data to lessen data overwhelm and drive decisions. So today you'll learn about ways to apply principles of storytelling to market research and the socialization of those research results, supporting these shifts and enabling teams to create empathy, influence decisions, and drive that impact. Another way to think about it is this. I'd like you to imagine that your company is a small boat lost at sea. It's dark, cold, and the waves are crashing all around you. No matter which way you turn, all you see is water, and with the certainty of finding land and safety is ever diminishing. While this is a bit dramatic, it's often what it can feel like for brands when working with data. Adrift in a sea of numbers and information, constantly updating and never ending, unsure of where to begin to find direction in the information to help in decision making. Also, it can be even more difficult to know how to take action in the data ocean that continues to expand every day. With data or water as far as the eye can see, it's not hard to feel powerless, choosing to float in stagnation rather than make a choice on where to turn the boat. But then, off in the distance, you notice a light circling. You realize that shore is much closer than you imagined. You turn the boat towards the light and begin to guide the boat to safety. Similarly, a guiding light exists for brands when they're lost in an ocean of data, helping communicate ideas, forge emotional connections, influence decisions, and drive impact. And that lighthouse is storytelling. So our agenda for today, 4 key areas. We're going to talk about why storytelling, why is it important, and why does it work? 3 principles for better storytelling, putting storytelling to work for you, and then a short Q&A. So let's talk about why storytelling. Why is it important, and why does it work? Let's start with the definition of storytelling. And that definition, as we see it, is how to tell data-fueled and insight-driven stories to help teams make business decisions. So storytelling is not about fiction. We may think about Dan Brown or Stephen King, those famous authors. They're the best at storytelling. It's not for us. But actually, storytelling is about how to tell data-fueled and insight-driven stories to help teams make business decisions. So today we're going to focus on using storytelling for communicating research results and the socialization of those results, but it also has broader application too, as you can see here. You know, anything where you are looking to influence people, a pitch, a proposal, an email, presentations, reports of all kinds, even a toast at a wedding. It has even application in everyday life. So let's think about what storytelling is and why it's so powerful. And there's 3 key reasons. It's omnipresent, it creates movement, and it's learnable. So first, it's omnipresent. So storytelling is everywhere. As human beings, we are programmed to find stories in everything we see. It's just how we make sense of the world. And therefore, for that reason alone, it's an incredibly powerful tool to be used in the business world to reach our objectives. Secondly, stories create movement. So we, again, as human beings, use stories to explain to each other who we are, to urge people to change, and to articulate the importance of a thought. And it can be used the same way in the world of business. And finally, storytelling is learnable. So storytelling is often associated with the creative arts, and many feel that storytellers belong to some sort of special club that we can never get into. But the fundamentals of storytelling are extremely straightforward, logical, and easy to grasp, as we will demonstrate today. So stories help us communicate in two key ways. They trigger empathy and they help us remember. So in terms of empathy, we know that emotions drive most everything in this world. And if we can help to connect our audience with the information presented at an emotional level, it will trigger their desire to help in the cause at hand and take action. Secondly, stories help us remember. So when we hear stories, our brain often releases dopamine, helping us remember the experience with greater accuracy. And if our audience remembers more of the information presented, they're more likely to act upon it. So speaking of stories helping us remember, here's a true story about storytelling. So a Stanford Business School professor, Jennifer Acker, performed a test on her own students. One by one, her class presented a 1-minute pitch. 1 in 10 of them used a story within their pitch, and all of the others stuck to the facts and figures. Afterwards, the class was asked to write down what they remembered, and only 5% remembered any statistic, and a huge 63% could recite one of the stories. Storytelling works. So now that we understand the importance of storytelling, let's talk about ways to do it. What are those 3 key principles for better storytelling that you'll hear about today? And they are the power of knowing your audience, the concept of structure, the classic story arc, and the art of delivery to achieve impact. And now I'm going to pass it over to Tim to take us through the power of knowing your audience.
Thanks so much, Anita. So now let's dive into the art of knowing your audience and the power that this can provide in ensuring that your message is communicated and impactful. Now, a good storyteller starts by coming to the realization that it's not about me. And I know how tough that can be, but we need to start thinking differently. And start to put the audience first, making it about them instead. And it sounds obvious, but it's not. Often our natural default is to want to talk about ourselves, what's important to us, and to see things from our own perspective. So to help in this initiative, we've put together a little how-to guide to start focusing and identifying who your audience is and how they will use the information that you're sharing. So ask yourself, who is involved? What level of information do they know about the topic already? And uncover what they care about, what their business needs are, as well as their attitudes and perceptions about the content before you share anything. And it's important to recognize, of course, that different stakeholders are going to want different things. They have their own objectives, concerns, and attitudes. So think about, what the stakeholder is going to do with the material and how it will help them achieve their goals. Put yourself in your stakeholder's shoes, and that will ultimately help you understand what they need to feel, know, and do. And this is a great template that we've made that you can take out and use whenever you want to do just that. So you can use this for any presentation where you'll be interacting with an audience. So for example, if I'm doing a presentation, let's say it's a webinar, maybe I want my audience to feel that I'm really smart, I know everything on the topic, and I am a master of storytelling, and I can hear the virtual applause from here. But obviously, that's not my audience's needs. They want to feel confident that storytelling will benefit them and have a positive impact on their deliverables. They want to know only what's relevant to make this happen and what they need to do next in terms of implementing best practices. And you may feel that these are similar, but going from the left to the right side is really good practice and can ensure that we're putting our audiences and their needs front and center. So to really help illustrate the power of storytelling, we're going to be walking you through an example to really bring the concepts to life. So for example, we're going to play the role of an insights team, bringing our research to a meeting to discuss a new feature that our client, Joyful Kid Toys, is looking to launch. So the feature is called Toy Triage, and it centers on an app that allows families that have purchased a product from Joyful Kid to send in their toys for repair and maintenance rather than throwing them away. So we'll be completing some pilot research for the clients, and they will plan to use that information to make important decisions before the app goes officially live. So the audience in our room is the CFO, the lead app designer, and the CMO. And while all of them work at the same company, each has their own unique goals, objectives, and style that we need to think about when we're designing our narrative. So with these three audience members in mind, let's review the feel, know, and do template that we created. So each of our three stakeholders really feels the same thing here. They want to be confident in having a successful launch of the Joyful Kid Toy Triage feature. But each are really looking at this through a unique lens and reaching that feeling of confidence in very different ways. So for our CFO, she has a financial lens. Will the feature be financially sound and have a positive ROI that she can show, her company stakeholders? The designer is coming to it with a usability lens. Will this experience be, the best it can be for users of the app? And for the CMO, she's looking with a marketing lens. How can I develop a message that's tailored to my target audience to make sure that I'm communicating the feature's promise? So understanding the lenses and the needs of the audience members really helps to tailor the story correctly in order to provide stakeholders with insights that will be memorable, have resonance, and drive action. So taking our specific Joyful Kids audience members' needs into account, the overarching client business question really becomes clear. So what unique benefits, improvements, and marketing efforts should the company focus on to ensure a successful and profitable launch? And using this, I can really then start to create a strong research strategy for Joyful Kid, rooted in answering the business questions by uncovering the reactions that parents and children have to the new Toy Triage feature. So with the question plan finalized, we can move into collecting the data, conducting interviews, all with our audience's need in mind. Now, luckily, through the use of some webinar magic, we've gone out and successfully completed the needed research, and we're ready to analyze the results. So let's take a moment and look at some of our key observations from the research. So to begin, kids really view their toys as family members. They feel a deep connection to them, and the parents are equally connected, and if something were breaking, they could often feel grief or helplessness as a result. Sustainability is a really key factor for parents nowadays when they're purchasing toys, thinking about the packaging or thinking about the plastic toy. And a lot of parents show interest in wanting something that would repair the toy rather than just being thrown away when it was broken. But when they went to use it, the kids had a very negative reaction. So they felt like they were being punished, or that the toys were going to be, sent away. Would they come back? A lot of uncertainty, and that translated over to the parents and made them feel that I don't know if I want to use something like this. It's going to cause such trauma to my children. So kind of looking at the connections that we can see, a lot of commonalities emerge in all of these data points that we can really roll up and synthesize into three main points. So if we build that out on the slide, we can see that the products are more than toys, they're family. That sustainability is a key component to the Toy Triage app's success, but sending those toys in was really emotionally scarring for kids, which is going to be a difficult message to deliver. With all of these insights, we can really see the connections that we're making and really allow us to achieve our goal of thinking beyond the data into what the data means, the so what of it all. So with our audience's mindset in hand, business question formed, and data points organized into our compelling insights, we can really start to form the basis of our story. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Anita.
All right, so now that we've got a sense of what we want to say, we want to create our stories. So now let's talk about that concept of structure. So structure is really about what are our key messages and in what order should they be introduced. So when we structure our stories, we want to consider things like how do we structure the story to create impact and movement, who are we taking on this journey, and how do we position it in a way that creates empathy and motivates them to act. How do we embed emotion and tension to have the audience wanting more, and again, to drive that action, that desire to help and the desire to change? And what is the now what that the business questions answer is finally pointing to? So the way we do this is through narrative structure, and our approach to narrative structure is using the classic story arc. So the classic story arc is the foundation to any story. While it's a film, a book, a cartoon, all classic stories will use a classic narrative structure. And the same thing is true for data-fueled and insight-driven stories. So before we go to data-fueled and insight-driven stories, let's share the components of the classic story arc and an example of it that many of us may be familiar with. So the components of the classic story arc that some of us may remember from school are the exposition, the rising action, the climax, the falling action, and the resolution. And to bring this to life, let's look at this story arc for The Lion King. So the exposition, for those of us who remember the story, or even if you don't, you can follow along with what the story is. So the exposition of The Lion King is that Rafiki presents the new baby Simba to the Pride Lands. The son and heir to Mufasa is here. Then the rising action is that Uncle Scar here is resentful. He should have been king. He's clearly unhappy about Simba's arrival. And then the climax, Uncle Scar plots the demise of Simba by triggering the wildebeest to charge. Hearing Simba's cry, his father Mufasa goes to Simba and in the process dies. Scar blames Simba for his death and tells Simba that to leave as no one will forgive him for killing the king. Then the falling action. Scar is now in charge and the Pride Lands fall to ruin under his leadership. Simba is miles away, leading a simple life, Hakuna Matata, with his friends, not knowing the fate of his home. He's then spotted by Zazu, the red-billed hornbill, who tells him of the situation. And then the resolution, with the kingdom in peril, Simba is forced to confront his troubled past and take his place in the Pride Lands. So that's the story arc for The Lion King. And now let's look at how to apply this to business storytelling and what we do. So here we have the same 5 stages of the story arc structure, right? Exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So let's go through this and how we can apply it to business storytelling. So first, we start with the exposition. So where is the business? What's the current situation? So what's going on? What's the context? So this can be your business question where that comes into play, grounding and guiding the story forward, or it can come from contextual insights from the research or other data. Then the rising action. So why do we need change? What's happening? So this consists of the synthesis of learning and insights. What insights and information do we have, especially that should compel the audience to do something differently? So we want to start looking for data and insights that implies that some sort of shift in behavior is required. And the climax. So this is what is the key insight that leads to the recommendations. Now this can include tension and serve as the pivotal moment. Often it's the key issue that the stakeholders are facing that will point to the recommendations that we will provide. Then the falling action, recommendations on how to move forward based on the climax, to the resolution. This is, where do they want to be? How will they be transformed? So, where will the client, where will the company, where will the stakeholders come out in the end if they take these recommendations? You can also think about this as, if you do, then you will. So now let's look at this story arc concept brought to life in our Joyful Kid example. So here you can see again, we have the 5 stages: exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution. So let's look at how we could tell the story of the Joyful Kid data that we saw earlier. So if we think about the exposition, again, where is the business? What is the current situation? So here we could say something like, sustainability is becoming more and more important to millennial parents, and it drives their toy purchase decisions. To meet the needs of this core customer group, Joyful Kid is introducing this toy triage app that allows customers to return broken toys for repair rather than disposal. So what benefits, improvements, and marketing efforts should we focus on prior to launch? Then the rising action. And remember, this is kind of why do we need to change? What's going on? So we learned that Joyful Kid products are not seen as toys, but as family members that should be nurtured. Sustainability and the idea of a toy triage app improve brand perceptions among parents, strong positive. But sending toys in for repair was emotionally scarring for kids. So then what's the climax? What is the key insight that leads to the recommendations? Okay, so in its current execution, the emotional toll that toy triage takes on children leaves everyone involved upset, the opposite of its intended effect. Seeing their kids' reaction, parents felt regret and guilt. While they would not use the service as it stands, they wanted to love it and felt that it could be a joyful experience if just some adjustments were made. Then the falling action, how do we move forward? Okay, what should we do? Enable children to understand the process and see it as exciting. Consider elements like a toy doctor mascot, status updates, a safe return guarantee, and packaging with air holes. Ensure messaging and visuals show how much Joyful Kid cares about its customers' family members, meaning the toys, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, the resolution. So this is, if we remember, where do we want to be? How will the company be transformed in the end? Well, with these changes to the Toy Triage offering, Joyful Kid can be assured of its app success and an increase in brand trust and sales. Further, Joyful Kid will be seen not only as the brand that cares about the environment, but as a brand that cares deeply about its products and the families that they make complete every day. So this is one example of a data-fueled and insight-driven story designed to help teams make business decisions. One that triggers empathy, takes into account what the audience needs to feel, know, and do, and motivates the audience to act and drives brand success. So a sketch of a story like this can then be used as the basis for communications with stakeholders. So now that we've gone through structure, I will hand it to Christy to talk us through the art of delivery.
Thank you, Anita. Well, once you have your story and you have it all laid out, then you've got to sell the story, right? We need to learn and practice how to deliver our story to our audience in a compelling way. So it's important to ensure that the main messages are clear while addressing the needs, again, of those various audiences that we've identified. We want to think about what are the exciting elements that we want to maximize so that that effect would be remembered after the presentation is given. And then in addition to the story arc that Anita just mentioned, we want to think of what visual and language techniques are we going to use to make sure that it enhances the narrative. It could be things like using constructs, like business constructs and things like that, or adding, we call them pregnant pauses throughout the way so that you pause and aren't rushing through the information. Metaphors work so nicely in selling your story. You'll notice that we had a metaphor during our presentation today of the ocean that's vast and then the lighthouse that's guiding our way. A metaphor uses two different things to compare, symbolize, and describe something that you're trying to communicate, right? They activate the imagination and bridge worlds together. The presenter is more able to convey emotions and impressions and images more so than just with words on the paper. It's also much easier to remember a metaphor than it is to remember the full story. An example, a good example in the center of the slide here of using a metaphor effectively to communicate transformation or growth would be this caterpillar, where you can show from a cocoon to a caterpillar to a butterfly. It's a very effective metaphor for communication. Now, let's lean into our example here, and we can talk about a metaphor that works really, really well. So here you have Santa. Santa is recognizable immediately. It evokes emotion, and it really brings the data to life. So if we say Joyful Kids Toy Triage leaves kids feeling more like they are on the naughty list, this helps you understand the sentiment. You know, they're on the naughty list. It's not great, and it's a well-known phrase. And this imagery works immediately to connect it with the message. And now we talk about emotion. Emotion is super important because it makes people care about what you're saying. So not only do you want to identify what feeling you're trying to evoke, but you want to communicate it in that way. So if it's a sad story, you want to communicate it with reverence. If it's an exciting story, you want to communicate it with excitement. But you really want to always focus on the human story, focus on the individual, and show vulnerability. Another great organizing technique is this power of three. It's great to think about what 3 things you want to remember. You want your audience to remember from what you're talking about. You can use it to structure your presentation into 3 mega sentences, sections. You can use it to structure your email communication in 3 main points. You can also use alliteration like the Vendi Vidi Vici that we've mentioned here. And what you want to ultimately do is emphasize those 3 points to aid in recollection. Now, this works because it offers brevity to the people who are listening, and in many cases, rhythm to what you want them to remember. communicate. Now, socializing your stories are so important. And we want to show you a couple of different ways that you can socialize stories that go beyond your full deck that you're presenting, let's say. Snackable stories are short, snappy, and shareable. They provide teams with snippets they can easily share to continue socializing over time, because you don't want your story to end after the presentation's over, but you want it to live and breathe within the organization. So now it's time to put storytelling to work for you. What we want you to keep in mind, again, we've emphasized this and I can't emphasize how important it is, but thinking about who is your audience, what do they want to do, feel, know, what's the story arc, and thinking about delivery tips to bringing structure, action, and impact to your message. And then finally, practice. Build that storytelling muscle, not only to create the stories, but also to deliver them effectively. I'm going to turn it back over to Tim.
Great. Thank you, Christy. All right, so knowing that humans are wired to uncover a story in everything that we see, leveraging the storytelling principles really help to ensure that your communications, whether an internal meeting, a formal research delivery, a toast at a wedding, are structured to promote understanding and inspire action. So if you keep that audience's unique needs and goals in mind, you can position yourself as a beacon of light in the sea of data for someone else, making your message truly memorable and actionable. And honestly, who doesn't want to be referred to as a beacon of light in their organization? So to assist in turning all of you into lighthouses and beacons of hope for your organizations, Ipsos has designed a storytelling training session for client teams to learn how to transform their deliverables into a data-fueled, insight-driven narrative. So the sessions are designed to be curated to include true client deliverables as case studies and workshopping them firsthand to utilize the storytelling principles and how they can be applied internally. So the sessions are open to all internal stakeholders that could benefit from learning the storytelling principles, and they can be structured in a lot of various time commitments and delivery methods. And the training will focus on deeply exploring and workshopping the 4 key principles of storytelling that Ipsos utilizes every day: objective, content, structure, and delivery, to really demystify the process of how to create an insight-driven narrative. And we've seen really incredible transformation and impact with clients that have completed the storytelling training so far, and it's really best summarized in the following quote. So I think we all know the power of storytelling. The difficulty, though, is actually where or how to start telling a story. The training not only showed the very powerful me benefit from making the change, but also provided very practical and thought-provoking means to do it. So now if you're interested in exploring more on this, please feel free to discuss it with your Ipsos contact or reach out to myself. And with that, we thank you for the time that you've given us today. And we'll open the floor to any questions that you may have. Now, I've seen a few questions come in through the chat so far while we were presenting, and we may not have time to get to all of them, but we can follow up with any after the session as needed. Let's see what we have here. All right, so first question here. So what if I have too much information? Really, where do I start to narrow that down? Anita, maybe you want to take that one, talk about from your content perspective?
Absolutely, great question. So yes, this is such a good point. Curating and synthesizing the data or your content is critical. And I would say that it's important to do 2 separate steps. First, kind of uncover your story, right? What am I trying to say here? What did I learn? What am I trying to say here? And then decide how you're going to tell it. So that first important step is deciding what are you trying to say. So it's part of it is deciding what you need to include and, importantly, what to exclude from your story. So while we don't have the time today to cover this in detail, basically, if this was for research, we want to do our analysis, look at all of our data. So what does this mean? What am I trying to say here? Or if it's a communication, an email, a training, a presentation, just, what is the message I'm trying to convey? What am I trying to say here? And some of my tips would be I always say, step away from the computer on this, right? because when we start to write a deck, it just forces linear thinking. We're trying to wordsmith ourselves before we're even know what we're trying to say. So step away from the computer and just get it out there. What are you trying to say? Whether that's, writing it down on a piece of paper, Post-its, dictate to your phone, whatever it is. Just say, what am I trying to say here, right? And then you probably got a bit of an outline, right? And then once you've kind of sussed out what you're trying to say, then you can structure it using the story arc. I find that doing it this way can save a ton of time and get you to a great result. So that would be my tip.
Great, thanks, Anita. Next question I see here is, I like the idea of addressing what stakeholders want to feel, know, and do, but where do I begin and how do I really know how to do that? I'll take that one, given I presented the section. And I think, it all starts in the idea of, like, a lot of times we can be afraid to do so, but really asking them, really just putting yourself out there, finding a way to ask that information that you're seeking for. And ideally, you would do that before the research even started, or, whatever the topic may be. But sometimes we obviously know that can't happen. So asking later is perfectly acceptable as well. But I think it's, really want to be clear on, like, what is the purpose of this and how are different people going to use it? So what's the origin of the ask for this information? What decisions are you going to make with it? What are you hoping to learn? What would bad news be? Just really trying to outline that before you can build down into the feel, know, do. And it does take some getting used to and getting comfortable, but really, trying to remove that inner bias that we have in communicating it out and really making it instead about what the client needs. Just, kind of utilizing the exercise or thinking, am I putting my own internal thought on, or am I putting the audience's hat on, and really just start to get comfortable with the concept. Okay, so looking here, any more tips on using metaphors? Christy, you want to take that one?
Oh, sure. What a great question. So essentially, you want to make sure that the metaphor has meaning for your story, right? So you first want to think about what is the story like? What are we trying to communicate in the story? And what other things in life are kind of like this idea? So for example, if your story is about transformation, you want to think, what is out there around transformation, like my metamorphosis example? Or if it's about, like, providing guidance or a guiding light, then you might use a guiding light metaphor like we've done here. So you want to really think about, like, what are you trying to communicate and what is important to your story, the ultimate important to your story. And then finally, you want to think about how to thread your metaphor throughout. So you don't want to let it hang, right? You want to introduce the metaphor, maybe reinforce it along the way, and make sure you resolve the metaphor at the end. You'll see how we did the guiding light at the beginning, and then Tim closed it off at the end with another reference to guiding light. That was important. And some people ask me, so where do you go to find them? So sometimes you can just brainstorm with a colleague, or you can go to Google and say metaphors for coming up with a great idea, or metaphors for transformation, things like that. Google can be your friend in many situations.
Our good friend Google.
Google.
All right. So here, in terms of the client training session that we mentioned, is this something that you can do collaboratively with your Ipsos team? Yeah, so absolutely. I mean, it's a very flexible nature and structure. It could be something that, a storytelling, lead and expert would present to your team internally, and for you to kind of work through and resolve that way. Or it's something that, if you work closely with teams at Ipsos every day, it's something that you could kind of co-create together and working through the deliverables and integrating them into your team, or just part of the presentation. Really, I think it's ultimately what's best for the business situation or for your team at hand, but appreciate the enthusiasm. I think here we have one more question of, what do you think is the hardest part of enabling storytelling in a deliverable? Ooh, it's an interesting one.
I'll take that one.
Yeah, okay.
Sure. That is a great question. And while everyone is different, and what comes more easily or more difficult to someone will vary, I would say, from training a good amount of folks on this, that it might be accepting the fact that you're not going to be perfect at it right away and being okay with that, having a learning or a growth mindset about it. So trusting yourself, believing that you will get better over time by using the kinds of techniques you learned about today or in other places about storytelling, etc. So my advice here would be to think progress over perfection and just start doing something differently and practice. That's how transformation begins. So just work that muscle and it will become part of what you do regularly and help you drive that impact.
Perfect. We've got one more question here, and I'm going to do justice to say it. It's hard to read on my very small screen. But I've seen in storytelling that oftentimes it's always pushed to ask a recommendation, and sometimes they're a little obvious. And how do you really avoid throwing out those generalized recommendations that could backfire or not resonate with the audience? And for me, what I'd say to that is I think that what I've seen in storytelling success is really making it a collaborative process, if you can, with your clients to say, what are you seeing here? This is the data, the recommendations. I'm feeling these things, but I want them to obviously be practical, and I want them to be something that you would actually do as an organization. And this could be, really a great opportunity to maybe even co-present the elements and talk from an internal perspective from recommendations, really just making sure that there's something that, can really resonate. Ultimately we can help, our clients look good or other team members look good. And that could be kind of a great way to do that by working together to have, a really strong recommendation.
And Tim, I would add to your answer and emphasize the collaboration element. So your stakeholders shouldn't see your story for the first time during the presentation, but if you collaborate with them along the way and even have a couple of iterative storytelling meetings where you say the story out loud and get their buy-in, not only on the story, but also on the recommendations, that will ensure your success when you are presenting after the fact.
And other than that, I see a shout out to Anita on her active listening skills. So maybe a future webinar topic for you, Anita.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And with that, Ellen, I'll turn it back over to you.
Wow, I just really want to thank everyone, especially Anita, Christy, and Tim, for today's really engaging presentation. As is evidenced, there were quite a number of questions. But for those who still want to ask a question, please do so. Please email us. Please get in touch with us directly. We're here to help you. And in the meantime, be on the lookout for a link to today's recorded presentation. That should come within the next couple of days. So that now concludes today's wonderful Ipsos webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.